that opening video shows how I throw my turnouts. The turnouts are thrown with Tortoise switch machines, and they're thrown with a single push button mounted on the fascia. The Tortoise switch machines are thrown by a stationary decoder that is mounted right on the bottom of the switch machine. So let's go into the layout and we'll take a look at what I've got going on, and I'll explain some of the features of the hair decoder. So under the layout here, you can see the Tortoise switch machine is just screwed at the bottom of the roadbed. And then you can see the hair decoder is mounted right here. It just plugs into the circuit board that extends out at the bottom of the switch machine. So if we take a closer look at the hair decoder here, you can see a strip on the end of the decoder that has multiple connections for wires. What's really nice about these decoders is they don't require a separate 12-volt power supply. You can see this one here is actually just connected up to my layout bus wires. The other thing they can do that's kind of nice is they have connections for either running a toggle switch to throw it, or in my case, a momentary push button. When you push the button, the turnout simply throws the opposite direction that it is currently at. There are also connections on here to hook up a couple of LEDs to indicate the route of the throw and turnout. What I did on mine is I actually purchased LED lit momentary push buttons. They were a single color, but I converted the buttons to use a bicolor LED, and I used these same connections on here to change the color of the LED in the push button. So my layout fascia only has just the button with the light that indicates the route inside of the button. The other bundle of wires you see coming off here go to power the frog, which changes via the Tortoise switch machine. And there's also two other connections over here that are used for what are called trigger rails. So the trigger rails are simply short sections of rail out the back of the turnout here on the two inside rails here. And what they'll do is, as a train approaches from this direction, when the truck gets on this trigger rail, that momentary short circuit tells the decoder to realign the turnout here for that route. I'm using the feature of the auto throw to keep trains from derailing as operators run through these turnouts, thereby hopefully eliminating a lot of spilled coal. So here we can see one of the momentary push buttons that are lit by an LED. Let's take a look real quick at how I make one of these. In this video, I'm going to show you how to convert a lighted momentary push button from a single color LED to a bicolor LED. The process is simply just removing the single color LED from the switch, replacing it with this bicolor. Here are some of the tools I'm going to use. I got a regular file. It just needs to be flat. The shape doesn't matter, but as long as it's flat, I find it works better. Some kind of flush cutting nipper, a small screwdriver that's kind of pointy. It's got a really thin blade on it. Razor blade is helpful, and then some solder, and of course a soldering iron that's not on the screen. This little jig I made here is for trimming the LEDs and bending them to fit in here. I'll put the dimensions and a little drawing up on the screen, and you can pause it and make a jig if you want to try this yourself. You can make one. This is just some styrene scraps I had. So the very first thing we got to do here is we got to get the switch apart, which actually is the hardest thing there is to do. Now the switch is held on, the bottom is held on by these little tabs and slots here. So we have to pull the bottom cap out far enough to clear these locking tabs. Now the switch is pretty tight, and you can sometimes get in here and pry that apart, but as you can see just there, you're going to end up poking your finger. What I found kind of works better is to take and make a little relief cut in the upper part of the switch here. So if I could get that to focus, you could see where there's a really tight fit in there. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to just cut like a 45-degree angle in the upper part of the switch here. You'll feel it kind of poke through, and it doesn't seem to go through the cap if you're not using too much force. I'd use a sharp new razor blade. And once you get that little cut in there, you can use another pass to deepen it. Now you can get your flat bladed screwdriver underneath there a lot easier. And so I usually do one on both sides here. Now with that little relief cut in there, what I do is I kind of work both sides at the same time. You kind of work this one up a little bit. I'm pushing in and I'm turning a little bit to kind of wiggle that and spread that plastic out a bit. Then prying a little bit this way, and then I'll go over to this side and do it. Now there's a spring in here, so I'm kind of pinching it. I'm holding it so that the pieces don't come flying apart. And once you kind of get it going here, you'll get it kind of over those two tabs there. You'll see it start to separate. Now once that happens, you can carefully pull the two pieces apart. Now in here there's a spring. Sometimes the spring will be stuck on the LED, sometimes it'll be sitting in the cap. The lens push button is held in there with some clips so it doesn't come out. So we can set that aside and set the spring aside. Inside of this button here, there's this rod right here. It floats kind of in this little groove in here. That there's actually another spring in there. I can take it out of there and show you that if this rod falls out of here, there's actually a spring. You can see it up. I don't know if you can see it right there. The LED is blocking it from coming out, but once we remove that LED, if that rod is out of there, you want to be careful not to lose that spring. Now, most of the time I try to do this all with this rod not coming out because it is a little bit of a tricky process putting it back in there. You have to get it up on top of that spring and hold it in there like that. So you want to be careful if you're handling this thing that rod doesn't fall out without you noticing it. The way this works is when you push down the button, it pushes that little rod down into those little contacts down there, and that's what bridges this side to this side and makes the momentary button work. So now what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to take my nipper here and I'm going to come in and I'm just going to kind of push moderately hard towards that black plastic area there just to make sure I can nip that LED. You can hear when it kind of lets go. And then you can save this LED for other projects. So now I'm going to take our bicolor LED, and this is where this little jig works out as I slide it down until it butts up onto the bottom of the LED itself. And at this point, if you actually had a small needle nose pliers, this helps a lot too. And on the upper step, the narrow part, I squeeze in on both sides. And after I do that, I go down to the fat part there and I squeeze down on both sides there. So what you're really doing is, and I kind of do it a couple times on each, is you're making your LED have this little step in it. And that step is the depth gauge at which we'll put the new LED back in so that we know it's the right height up inside of this cap here to push the button all the way back up to the full height. Also on this little jig here, there's a line right there. It's kind of getting wore out for me making so many of these, but there's a little line scribed on each side of there. That's where I want to cut my LED leads off. And we don't have to worry about the polarity on this because we can, both sides will make it light up. It just will make it be a different color, and we can just flip the wiring around on these switch machine or whatever you want to use this for. Now this one I got a little long here, but what you really want is just a little LED like that with those little teeny bent legs. Now, the way the original LED is in here is you can actually see the part that we left in there. It goes down and these longer tabs here have actually a fork. You can look down in there and see it. And what they are is they're installed by pressing those into the forks. They're not soldered in there. And then they put this glue on the bottom to hold them in. Now, I have had luck just pulling the LED out and taking the new one and just forcefully pushing it back into those forks. And I've had them work good that way, but it does take a lot of work and they're not 100% reliable. So what I like to do is squeeze these in a little bit so there's a small amount of tension on the center piece that we're going to slip it over. And I lay these little extensions right up next to each other. Now I slide it down so you can see where the part that we bent over, kind of like the little dog leg thing there, will go down and sit on top of that black plastic thing that's holding the spring inside of there for that rod. And I lay those right up next to each other. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of flux on these pieces here. Get this one, make sure they're kind of touching each other there. Then I'm going to carry a little bit of solder over with my soldering iron. And I'm just going to come in here pretty fast and just put a little dot to bridge the two pieces together. Just like that. Now, I'll show you what's going on here. So I have a switch that I sacrificed, and I would advise you, if you're going to do this, that you get a couple extras because you're going to lose a few of those rods and some springs. So I took one of my parts ones and I broke this out of the black plastic thing there. What's going on here is that this is actually sliding down over the legs of this LED, and they're pushing that rod down. But because that little blob of solder on there is a little bit wider than the original, the original legs that had no solder on them, this gets really tight on there. So what I like to do is take this file and just duress that down a little bit. Now you want to be careful with that so that rod doesn't fall out. But a few strokes on here to level that all out. It'll make the clearance that you need for inside that clear housing. And if you have a spare one, you can test fit it so you can feel that it doesn't bind on there. So now this one's still binding a little bit. I'm actually going to give it a small squeeze here to make sure it's tight. And I see a little bit more solder right here. Now the inside of this is, of course, it's round, and so if you file flat here, you want to make sure you put a couple strokes at an angle here to make sure that you're making it fit inside that inner diameter. Okay, so that actually feels like it clears pretty good. Now I got to put that rod back in that just fell out. Push this little spring back in its home. Now to put this rod in, sometimes you have to kind of make sure that spring is down. You have to go up a little bit of an angle to get on top of that spring and push it in there. Now I'm going to check fit this one more time, and it feels pretty good. Now if you have this out like this, you can go ahead and make sure that this thing is straight in there too. You don't want it being off at an angle anywhere. Now we'll put the spring back on. Now these LEDs I have are just a tiny bit bigger than the original ones, so the spring fits really nice and snug on there. And then you simply just put the cap back on. And then go ahead and give it a test push. Now, if you didn't get those ends filed, this can stick. And you want to make sure that it doesn't stick on there. If it does stick, just simply pop it off and readjust it some more. One thing I've learned with these is when you're pushing this cap on, push it on by trying to grab the sides and push it together. Don't push it on by pushing the button on. Also, when you're pushing this through your control panel or your layout fascia, don't push the button into the hole by this here. Try to push on just the sides here, because what will happen is if you push it on the button really hard, you'll end up putting little dents in the side of this clear plastic thing. And what will happen is the switch will bottom out and it won't push that rod nice and tight between the two contacts, and then the button won't work anymore. And another reason why it doesn't hurt to have a few spares in case you do that on accident or one of your operators pushes really hard. Now they are durable, but if you do push this, you can see this one was damaged too. It's got some divots in it. So that's how you convert this button. The process actually goes a lot faster when you're not trying to explain it. The ones with the dots here, those are for the LEDs. So that would be, the LED would be on this side and the opposite side, and then these two are for the momentary buttons.